Coaches, we're getting into about the halfway or one-third point of the season. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's starting to get dark. It's getting a little cold. All those preseason expectations and positivity that we had are starting to wear off. And maybe some of the issues that weren't evident at the beginning of the season are starting to emerge. There could be disconnection happening inside your teams now. Players not connecting with each other well, coaches and players not connecting, having misunderstandings. Some of that conflict is starting to bubble to the surface at this point of the season. That's what we're covering today in episode 24 of the Don't Tell Me, Show Me podcast. Mark, Allen, thanks for joining me again, as always.
It's good. It's good for all three to be together. It's good when we do these all three.
Yeah,
Not to say the two is not bad.
No, it's always good. Just a change of scene for me. I'm allowed in the house today. I'm not in my garage, so I'm in the study. So let's kick things off. Let's make sure we have a shared understanding of what we mean by disconnection. So, Mark, if you could kick us off, like, okay, how do you define it, or what does it mean to you? And then we'll get into what causes that disconnection.
So I'm going to share. I know will be a different angle than Alan, so we can come from different aspects. So, disconnect for me is reducing or not having the synergy within interdependence, the flow of relationships of conversation with clarity towards a common purpose. So, disconnect. It could start before you even begin. During when things aren't going well, when conversation are had where people have been uncomfortable and they haven't directly had the conversation, they start popping into echo chambers, meaning a group of people that they start venting to and not being happy with, but they're avoiding having a conversation with the person they need to have with, and then we start to get this separation within the team and the organization. So we have unspoken conversations with the person that needs to have the conversation, but we're having conversations with people that may be supporting our bias, which then can build bigger barriers, which starts a self-fulfilling prophecy of that separation disconnect.
So we're starting to avoid at this point in the season having the conversations with people who we need to talk to. And then on the flip side, we're probably having too many conversations or too deep conversations with the people who are agreeing with us. So we're actually by unconsciously selecting who we're having deep conversations with, we are unwittingly reinforcing some of those disconnections that we have with athletes.
And to be fair, I see this in schools, in business, and even in families, but across all levels of sport, from the very elite to the grassroots. So it's not just in a certain part of sport. This is where there's people when maybe things aren't aligned or unwritten, spoken perceptions, invisible expectations, etc. Alan, your take.
Yeah, my take, not to repeat you, my mind went straight to how does it get to that point, Mark? Like, how did we arrive there? Because a lot of coaches I'm working with at the moment, they're 2 months into their season, they're 3 months into the season. They weren't complaining about this issue in the preseason. As Simon said on the intro, everything was really exciting and new, and the motivation was high, and everybody was polite to each other. And now we're 2 months in, 3 months in, and for whatever reason, and there's many, disconnect is starting to happen between players and players, not just players and players disconnecting, players from coaches disconnecting, and if coaches are honest, coaches disconnecting from some players. So this isn't just about, you're in a change room and two players are having an argument, or or in a practice session, two players blow up with each other. This is very much the coach involved, the coaching staff involved in this process as well, and not just the player disconnecting from the coach. But I think I want to repeat myself here for emphasis, coaches disconnect from players as well, whether it's conscious or subconscious. I think that's something that we should be very aware of. But my mind went to, how did we get to that point? And, Simon, I'll pump the brakes there because it looked like you want to jump in.
Well, I was just thinking about my sister. I don't know why that came up, but
Is she a listener to the podcast?
not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Not so
Well,
interested
hopefully
in.
after this she is, if this is a compliment, by the way. Go ahead.
So there's a bit of an age gap between us. We get along perfectly fine. She's down in London, I'm up here in Edinburgh. So, we see each other 2, 3, 4 times a year. So, uh, one of us will have a challenge in our lives, probably work through it, and the other one might not even know. Or at best, we're exchanging some WhatsApps. But in a sports team, we're together all the time. Somebody's got something on going on with their life, and because you spend so much time together, other people pick up on it all the time. Like there's no escape from that. There's very little like working out your own stuff in the background. It's just that stuff comes back to the team all the time, and that's grating sometimes if you don't get along with that person. It's tiring even if you do get along with the person. Like it's understandable that we just drift away from challenging conversations, or somebody on your team or somebody your coach has just got a communication style. Like that's for me. Like if someone's got a different communication style, because quite I'm a listener. I'm not the first person to speak usually. I'm a little bit introverted, and I can get along with extroverts just fine. I wouldn't be working with you two if I couldn't do that. But like all day, every day, I'll actually start to I've noticed myself start to shy away from some of the extroverts because I just feel like sometimes I just don't have the energy.
Well, let's not forget the other element with this disconnect, which we've seen. It links into our last episode when we're talking about coach relationship, assistant to head coach, is coach to coach. And particularly if you have a head coach, I'll give you an example that is visionary in their thinking. They never switch off. So between coaching sessions or matches, they're analyzing problem solutions. Then they come to a conclusion. They've done it all in their head. Uh, and then the assistant coaches aren't in the loop on that. And then something comes in, a head coach, all right, we're doing this. And the assistant coach go, well, that's not aligned to what we'd previously agreed. And do I now, because they're in that dominant mode, do I challenge now or do I seek to understand and clarity? I'll avoid it this time. And you avoid it this time, and then you know what's going to happen. Then you speak to the players, and you're looking at the players, and you're thinking, are they sensing the assistant head coach is now not aligned? Are they picking up on certain things? So it, as well as a coach to players, players to coach, coach to coach, players to players, it's where there's people and where there's lack of clarity. For me, from the beginning, I feel that's where the problem arises, where I call it invisible expectations. But whether in a sports team, beginning of the season, in pre-seasons, a lot of people set these aspirations and these behaviors, etc. And often they're not followed through, often they're not real, sometimes they are. But sometimes people set high expectations that aren't real, but it's in their heads. So then when things don't go according to their expectations, because they haven't baseline reality until you start playing matches against the opposition, you really don't know, then this can start to unravel because people react to their perceived failure very differently. And then their response to it within others can start impacting this separation, this disconnect. So for me, often it's beginning with have we been really clear on our expectations, on what we know and what we don't know, and do we keep hooking back into that? And that, for me, that is one of the initial sources of this disconnect. We're already starting to allow it to happen at the beginning because we haven't made things clear and how we're going to measure success. And when do we know when we've got a baseline? Well, reality is the first few matches is where we're going to start getting our baseline. We won't get it in pre-season. So why are we having these expectations? I had a great example, not going too deep, because I know Alan's ready to jump in, is one of the teams I was working with, I'm sat at the back and the coach is speaking to them and they're saying, right, where do we want to finish this season? Where do we think we finish this season? I think they said fifth. And I'm at the back and I'm thinking, well, I can't step in now because the coach is, that it's just put something in that we didn't speak about. And then afterwards I said, how do we know? And said, well, it's just something we can set ourselves to. So, okay, so why didn't you ask them who were the top four teams we've already decided will beat us? Who are they then? And why? And who are the teams that we've decided we're going to beat? It's pie in the sky. But if that's the way we're looking, when we now are seventh, eighth, ninth, is that a reference that actually could start interfering with success, Are we doing well? Are we not? Or when we're failing this season now because we're not meeting our targets from the very beginning, because our measure may not have been something that's in our control, as an example. Alan,
Yeah, I'll carry on. I'll stay in the space you're in, Mark, around, the baseline hasn't been established. So inevitably there's going to be disconnect because you've got, like you said, false, unrealistic expectations. There's a silent dance always happening around expectations that no one really talks about, but everyone holds on to those thoughts and feelings. And then when they don't get met, you end up with just disconnect and frustration and all this type of stuff because um, I guess we do that in all aspects of life, really, but on the sports field, it gets amplified because there's a pressure cooker of a clock, performance, results, media, um, social identity, self-identity perception, and all that stuff. But I think one area, so I'm thinking now with my coach's hat on, well, how can I get ahead of that? What else can I do to ensure that we're best equipped when we get punched in the nose and we can stand up to the test when something could easily disconnect us. I think one way coaches could do that is help players develop their level of self-awareness. And I think you start that from day one. And it's those micro moments, it's those one-to-one conversations. It's what you said as well, Mark. It's baselining as a group or performance or ability or capability or combination capability and really drilling down into that. But it's also then on a one-to-one basis. As a coach, can I help each one of my players or the players I coach? Can I help them to enhance their level of awareness of self? And how do I do that? And it's a lot of one-to-one interactions. And what kind of questions can I ask? Because it will come through the form of questioning. So if we're going to put a preventative method in to tackle potential disconnect during the season because of expectations held by each individual, well, let's deal with them as individuals also, as well as baselining the team's performance.
there's
Mark,
Alan,
your head's out of
there's
the cage. They haven't
because
lifted it
because
yet.
because there's lots I want to share, but there's one that a light bulb's just gone off with
Go
something
for
I want to
it.
share that you've said. Is one of the things that can cause it is coaches providing false promises when they're hiring, when they're getting contracts, and when people are coming in. Because often, I'm not saying all the time, but often a player, one of the reasons for coming in is how much court time, pitch time am I going to get? So if the coach turns around and says, "Oh, you're going to be on my first pick for, unless there's an injury or something, I see you as my first pick," and then within 2 games they're on the bench and now they're playing less minutes, immediately that athlete, unless they've got they've already built good software skills where they can go reach out to coach and go, "Coach, let me know the reasons why." What will happen is that immediately we could form a disconnect. And then the other element of dishonesty, it's maybe a tough word, but for me, reality is reality. If when you're now sharing who's selected, and sometimes you'll have to have one-to-ones depending on the relationship rapport of the team, of right, I'm picking you, I'm not picking you, and you start being dishonest on why you're not picking them, that again could start causing a disconnect because often they'll learn the truth and then it doesn't follow up because you're saying, I'm doing that to be kind, but what you're doing is you can be setting up real barriers within a few weeks when actually what you've said why is not now materializing. So that false, not being honest, setting expectations aren't real. There's no way you should be promising those expectations, but the coach is doing because they want the player to sign. That again can cause the disconnect.
We're seeing something in the NBA at the moment. This player in Memphis, Ja Morant, who is in seemingly in conflict with a head coach who's trying to do some things differently, trying to change the rotation, so shorten the amount of time that players are on the court, but then rotate them more often. So you're playing more often, but for less time, and it's going against just the norms basically. So they're about 10, 15 games, whatever, into the season. And this is when it's emerging. And it's not the preseason, like you said, Mark.
Yeah.
It's not even in the first 5 games. They've just had enough now where there's enough of a sample size, or there's just been enough games for the resistance to reach a certain tipping point with the star player. And now we're in exactly this disconnection situation. It was classic for this time of year that it emerges at this point. So did that coach have a shared expectation, a shared understanding with the star player in the preseason? That would be a great question to ask that coach, because it may well be that the coach thinks they do have that shared understanding, but the shared understanding is different to the shared agreement. Did they explain up front that we were going to make this change to how we coach? Probably. Did they actually have an accurate view on to what extent the star player agreed with that? Don't know. That's the
And
gray.
there's two elements to that, Simon, that is really important. One is, even if it was agreed and the star player bought into it, there also possibly wasn't the clarity of, okay, so how long do we need to go for this before we should expect a performance impact? Because you're switching capability combinations. I've done it with teams. So you should be able to work harder, more intensely, but because of the rotations, you won't have your strongest players on as much together as you would do traditionally. So if that expectation isn't connected, that's one that can go wrong. The other one that's massively that, again, I wouldn't say this falls in the dishonest bit, because I don't think coaches do it deliberately. But if a coach says to the team and to other coaches, right, this is how we're going to measure our performance. Player A, this is how I'm going to measure your performance. And this will define in practice and in matches how much more time you get on the pitch, how you're growing. And they put these markers in. And we potentially would agree with those markers. As soon as the match starts, the coach is now focused on scoreline. And all those markers go absolutely out the window, because the coach will be reviewing the player based on the result, the score, not on those performance markers. So now the coaches now discredit themselves on how they're going to benchmark the performance of each player throughout the season. And that is another common element I see. Are we honoring our agreement? So when we're having an agreement with a player or other coaches, we've got to make sure, if the going gets tough, am I still going to honor that myself and have that honest conversation with yourself? Because if I'm not, don't promise them, don't set them up as markers, because it's just going to set up negativity and that separation we speak about.
Okay, so for the coaches listening, some of this is resonating. Yeah, I'm having some of this disconnection. It might only be with one or two players, or it might be between only a small number of players. So if you were coaching a coach right now, and they came to you, described what you've just been talking about, that disconnection, what do? Help. They're in a hole. It's not fully dug yet, but they're up to their knees in this hole. What advice do you have? How do you help them get out of that?
There's two ways to look at this, Simon, because there's two separate interventions here. The intervention you've just shared is we haven't set it up at the beginning. So now we've got to do an intervention when things have happened, which is slightly different than if we set it up at the beginning.
Yeah.
So within this, but where the similarity is, only in my take on it, is we have to start begin the role model of what we're expecting of others, whether that's other coaches and other athletes. And we need to have a real honest conversation with everyone to say, look, I'm feeling and sensing that we're missing that level of honesty, but solution-based honesty, seeking to understand, helping each other support to where we want to go. And I feel I'm part of that as well. I'm not doing a good enough job as that. So this is what I'm going to start doing. But then it's having those interventions where you're spotting those conversations. I call them ninjas, but those players that are influencers of people that highly motivated. I would be then having a conversation with them as well to say, look, I need to do this better, but I need your support with this. So can we get around the team, find out, where the barriers are, find out where we can get some clarity. But then once we get that agreement in place, it might be a whole another podcast, Simon, is we then need to be the person that ignites the behaviors we're asking of others in that honesty, clarity. For me, proactivity is where the killer is. Having a proactivity to have the conversation early with a clear success. So if I'm going to have a conversation with the player, I want the door open so the player can have a conversation with me, but making sure the first time a player steps in through that door to go, coach, can I have a word about this? And we go, okay, what success? Let me understand. That player first, player last. Is we honor the behaviors we're saying to them. When this happens, I will honestly listen and explain to help us align. as soon as we don't honor the behaviors we're asking, I'm too busy now, or you're just because you haven't got picked. Our barriers, our biases is going to kill everything that we want the intervention to change. So for me, it's always checking, and we've spoke about this on the podcast, but I would still start with, and it might be a bit of a slow, right, let's start filming your interactions. Let's start filming how you communicate. Because for me to give you suggestions without one knowing how you coach in these moments when it's good and bad, how you interact, how you share selection, I'm pretty sure unless they've filmed themselves and looked it back with someone that can support them to review, they are probably inaccurate in their self-awareness of how they're interacting in one-to-ones, etc. So for me, I would still need a baseline first, and then from that baseline, spot where the trends are. Then I would share that interaction of clarity, but it's got to come from a coach without a but. The coach has to share without a but. They go, right, we're noticing this. I need to do better. We need to do better. But it's going to start from me, and then start opening those doors.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Alan?
can I can probably share examples. Like I think Mark makes a great point there, Simon, around having the context before you could answer that question with real clarity and add value to a listener. Then the Mark knowing the context of that listener's challenges around disconnect would be important. So I'll give my own examples of how I've tackled disconnect with coaches as well as players, and I'm talking coaches to coaches and then players with players. So I'll give a couple of examples. One. I've approached it with a restorative practice framework in mind. And it effectively means that I'm comfortable to say to a player or another assistant coach, which I've done to both, and said to them, when you do this or when you do that, it makes me feel like this. So, for example, to a player, and I did it last night, in fact, but it wasn't exactly in the same format, but you could probably align it a little bit. A player cut a corner last night in practice, and I could feel frustration building up in me. And instead of verbally vomiting and being in attack mode, which I've done in the past, and I'm sure I'll fall off that cliff edge at some point again in the future, but it rarely happens, thankfully, these days. I pulled that player aside and I said to him, when you're just not sprinting the floor and you're jogging, when you do that repeatedly, it just builds up a level of frustration inside me. And can I explain to you where the frustration is coming from? I believe you've got levels. I believe you've got so much potential. You're scratching the surface. And I find myself feeling frustrated that you're not pursuing your potential. So when I see you jog on the floor, I can feel frustration building up inside me. And I feel the need to share that with you. I didn't need to say any more. He sprint the next few times. He's like, Coach, I'm on it, man. I got you, man. I said, don't have me. Have yourself. It's not about having me. I got you. No, don't have me. So I use restorative practice quite a lot. I disconnected. We disconnected myself and an assistant coach on the national team a number of years ago. I used the same approach. I told him when you're communicating the way you're communicating and when you're behaving in certain ways, it makes me feel this way. And the repercussion of that is X, Y, and Z to the team. And we were able to have an adult to adult discussion with that approach. It wasn't me telling him, you can't do that, don't do this, do that. It was when you do that, it makes me feel like this. And it just allows me then to have that conversation as Mark talking about, because I'm not attacking anybody. I'm actually talking about how it makes me feel. People generally have more empathy with that approach. So that's one way I've approached players and adult coaches that I've had disconnects with and we've disconnected.
I can give you some context examples of following up from Alan. So one is, and it links into one of Alan's there, is one of the questions I ask coaches is what's been pre-agreed and what's been the clarity of the pre-agreement. That's why I use those UAEs, what's that look like, and the what if we don't, based on that rule of three of self and recognize an athlete. So if we go to a warm-up example, and this is common, by the way, we'll talk about general words about a warm-up. We've really got to commit to the warm-up, be ready, loud voice, blah, blah, blah. But have we synced into whoever's taking the warm-up, so S&C, and I'll give you, these are real-world examples I've had at elite level, is the head coach has brought the S&C in and shared with them the behaviors we need you to align to. So an example is if you say once they've warmed and they're still in the warm-up at that half later stage, and you say, I want you to sprint past that line, I need you S&C coach we're doing it with the players as well, but if the S&C coach is managing that warm-up, I need you to be scanning for every single athlete early on in pre-season. It's decelerating before they go past that line. Because you may think that's a little thing, but for us, that's an attitudinal behavior thing. We've said sprint past the line, and early on in pre-season, we're allowing the puppy to poo on the carpet. We're allowing them to decelerate before the line. I'm using this as an important example because I think everyone can relate. So if we're agreeing it, we've got to get them to understand the why, not just to pre it. Why is that so important for us as a team? Because if we're going to commit to something, we've got to follow it through 100%. You decelerating before the line is saying, actually, I'm kind of doing it. I'm not doing it. But if we agree it, even with clarity, then we allow someone to decelerate before the line. We're saying it's okay. What can then happen is later on in the season, if we're not winning, we start fault finding more without realizing it. And all of a sudden, that person that for 3 months could decelerate before the line, we're now going, you're not committing. You look, you're slowing down before the line because now I'm looking, where's the fault? And now that player's thinking, well, what's your problem? I've been all right for months. Now you're picking on me. So this is that point about what pre-agreements have you put in place around behavior and attitude, communication? Has it been really clear to everyone on the why? And have we been scanning for it and celebrating the progress, but also firm, fair, and friendly, holding people accountable if they haven't as peers to the pre-agreement? Not, hey, go back again. It's what did we agree? So it may be a reset as a tool. Right, running in. One of my things that I share with a lot of teams is sprinting in a timeout and not walking in or jogging in. Why? Because I want them to have the attitude to get there first. The quicker we're in, the more we've got time to communicate, the quicker we can get out before the opposition. It's an attitudinal, fatigued or fresh, doesn't matter. So in training, if we're allowing athletes to walk in, we're saying it's okay. So a lot of this is about a great example. Another one I can share is there was and one was a captain, by the way, and another player had a real hard argument. Things weren't going well in this match, and they blew up on each other in front of everybody. And even after the match, they refused to communicate. Apart from venting, they both stormed off, refused to talk. The coach didn't follow that through straight away. The coach allowed it and hoped they would sort it out, and they didn't sort it out, and that actually went on for a few months before they got back. So I was really clear to say, look, you have to, if they're not having a conversation, you need to make it happen. It was unacceptable for you to let it go on based on the pre-agreements we had about what the behaviors look like. If we're struggling with someone, if we don't agree with something, we see if we can sort it out. If we don't, we pull someone else in to help us. That may be coach or another player, whatever it may be. So if we're saying that's what we're going to do, and if we haven't, that may be an issue, but if we have, we've got to follow it through. Now, if it hasn't been agreed and I'm seeing an issue with players to player, there's got to be an immediate proactive intervention. And it may be whispering to one of the players, what are you going to do with that? I can see there's a bit of animosity there. I need you to be synced. And that player might go, oh, we've already sorted, we're catching up at 6 p.m. We're having a chat about it. And okay, let us know how it goes. But if they're going, oh, I don't want to talk to them, I said, well, we're going to have to. So it may be then the coach says, right, let's all meet, all three of us, because it's so important. I can't let it go, and we can't go into the next session. So they're real world examples of really looking at where's the source. Has there been pre-agreements that we're not following through that are important to us? But if we're seeing something that hasn't been pre-agreed, are we letting it go on? Or actually, are we having proactive interventions in those moments?
Right. So, Alan, how do you, that's great. I agree with Mark. I've listened to all that. But what do I do tomorrow when I show up to coach and I want to initiate? So I want to take that principle that Mark's just described. I want to put it into action. I want to resolve this disconnection between two players or disconnection I have with a player. Help me start. Like, what do I do and how do I prepare for that? What do I do in the first instance? How do I initiate the conversation? What are the first words that should come out of my mouth when I want to initiate that repair?
Can I do a few seconds before Alan starts?
Go for
5
it.
seconds. Before you start the conversation, breathe, check your state, and ask yourself what is success for you before you even start the conversation.
Great. Okay. Let's assume I've done that. Thanks, Mark. Now, Alan, how do I start?
But I think you when you have the conversation, you establish what is happening. And you establish what is happening by saying, so I'll role play with you, Simon, if you don't mind. Simon, I'm noticing a few things down through the past number of weeks, and I just want to check in with you that what I'm noticing is actually happening. I'd like to share what I'm noticing. Is that okay? You're going to say yes, because I've asked you for permission. I've noticed that you and Mark are, you're not on the same page. I'm sensing a disconnect there. Would that be fair to say? I'm not telling you, I'm asking you. And I'm coming out of the role now, Simon. And the reason I'm asking you that question as opposed to telling you, because I want you to engage in a conversation with me. I don't want you to be on the receiving end of a traditional old school teacher pupil conversation. That's not going to work. You're going to bullshit me. Sorry to swear on the pod. Is this the first time someone swore on this
Uh,
podcast?
First of
So,
many.
first of many. All right, let's keep going then. So I don't want to enter into an interaction where you're just listening, waiting for me to finish, walk off, and you tell me, yeah, yeah, all's good, I'll work on it, and nothing actually happens. I want to have an intentional, valuable conversation with you, not talk to you. So that's why I would approach you with that. First of all, you were going to say something, so I'll pause there.
Well, I was going to say, I want to move this podcast in the direction of Star Wars and Marvel plot theme, character assassination conversations, but Mark is completely resistant to that, wants to stick to sports coaching. So that's our conflict. That's a summary of our conflict situation in this
Okay.
hypothetical example.
Yeah. So whatever the disconnect is about, the next phase, the next bit I would go to is I would explain that it's normal. I would actually use the neat model that we spoke about here before.
Mhm.
And I would explain to you, Simon, that it's actually normal to disconnect throughout the season. This isn't new. It's not the first time, won't be the last time. And it does happen. And that it's okay. And the emotions that you're both expressing towards each other or the disagreements you have, it's normal to respond with those ways that you've responded. So nobody's attacking your personality or how you've gone about doing stuff here. And then I would go back to, again, the neat model. Just can it's there's an acceptance needed to be had on both sides here. It would be healthy for us to find a resolution. What do you think we could do collectively? What could you think I can do to help us to fix and repair this relationship? Because the ultimate remind me what the ultimate goal was at the start of the season. So reconnecting back to a bigger picture thing, taking away from the micro focus on I don't like Mark, Mark doesn't like me. Okay, let's acknowledge that that's been happening, but let's reconnect to the bigger purpose and what we agreed as a team at the start of the season, the type of team we wanted to be. So it would be very much entered into that type of space, Simon. It's not me telling, it's
Yeah.
engaging.
Yeah, great. So you've built a couple of yeses. That's what I heard. You've asked me a couple of questions to begin with. You've asked for permission, so I've said yes a couple of times. And that just opens me up in some way towards the beginning of the conversation, as opposed to coming in with, right, we need to talk about this thing, or starting with a statement. Your behavior has been unacceptable. We need to talk about that. That's going to switch people off, right from the beginning. So just establishing a bit of rapport and a couple of yeses at the beginning of the conversation seems to help.
Yeah, and then I would involve them. I would ask them, like, how can we pull together? Like, do you have any thoughts, ideas, opinions on how we can repair this and move in health? I'd ask them for ideas and thoughts. And first of all, do you want to? Like you can't force this onto somebody. At the end of the day, these are, especially if you're dealing with adults and you're talking about senior teams, you can't force them. You can only hope they see the value of them actually repairing that relationship and for the betterment of the team, which is why you go back to the connection to the bigger picture. And this isn't just a one-to-one either, Simon. I would take this same approach in the change room at halftime with a team. If I noticed that the team, there was a lot going on in the first half and just we're all over the place and guys are really disconnecting even with the style of play. People have gone a bit maverick here and it's, it's the cracks getting bigger and bigger. I would approach the conversation the same way at halftime in the change room. And in fact, with your support, we did do that a number of years ago. And subsequently, I've done it by myself in stages with the GB team on a different level, more around style of play, disconnection with style of play.
If
Great.
I add a little bit from Alan's, one of the areas, and this is all judgment, by the way, because you've got to read the room. So obviously the language I often use is, so what options have we got, which is Alan asking for ideas. But the other question I ask is, what's going to be the impact if we don't? Not just for you two, but for the team, aligned to what we agreed we wanted to be in these moments. So once we get there, once we come up with an agreement, this is where another trip up happens, and there's a solution to it, obviously, is what I call that words to action. So when we leave, we can't go, yeah, I'll sort it out, boss, wherever it is. What I want to get to is, because often that does not work. Nothing really happens, or we don't really know. It's okay. So we've agreed a strategy. Do you want to talk through with a strategy? What you're going to do, when, with who. So now they've got to really think through, right, I'm going to meet them at this time. So we're going to go, okay, when are you going to let me know? What's that going to look like? So now it's getting them to think ahead on what ifs. So instead of having a conversation, you go, yeah, right, great, and you go, right, can I leave that with you? Yes. And some people you might go, I know now I can leave it with that person, but others, commonly, it's getting to, okay, so what's the now we've agreed, great, love that option. What's the strategy? What do you mean, coach? Well, how are you going to approach it? When are you going to approach it? What are you going to say? How do we know what's going to be the agreement? How are we going to see it in practice? Does the other team need to know? We had a great one with Danny, remember, back with Rockets, where he came into the change room afterwards and he shared with the team. This is what I need from you. If you see me doing this, I'm giving you permission. Often because we need the collective. We don't want to go, oh, what's happening with these two? We want to share. We've had a chat. This is what it is. This is what we're going to do. This is how you guys can help us. So the words to action of strategy is really important. Then you've got to scan for it. And if you see them following through, massive positive reinforcement. You've got to let them know you appreciate that and you've noticed it. If you're not seeing it, you've got to follow through. You can't leave it. And
Right.
that's so important.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the rapid fire section to finish off here. This can be a summary of some of the information we've shared already in this episode, or some new things. It's quick fire. We'll go around the screen. So this is tips for coaches on how to deal with disconnection that might be starting to bubble up in your team. I'll go first. Treat repairing relationships as a skill. This really helped me as a parent. I actually started to think of, how do I repair when things have disconnected? What's actually my strategy? What are some frameworks or approaches that I can use in the subsection or the sub skill of repairing relationships? Mark?
Climb the tree. You're stuck in a woods, you're getting emotionally involved, you have stronger and lesser rapport with some players, you're almost starting to get emotionally too entrenched in the situation. Climb the tree, remind yourself with a vision, have real clarity of what you need to be to help them, and then start the interventions. Don't just rush in.
I'm next.
Go for it,
I
Alan.
would say uh, develop a bank of questions you can ask players to help them understand themselves better in your context, your team this season, knowing that they're probably going to be slightly different than they were in previous teams. So, for example, how would your previous teammates and coaches describe you when you're at your best? Describe me of it taught me through when you're at your best on the court. What does it look like? What do you look like? What does it feel like for you? What do you need around you in those moments? Just a bank of questions to help them understand themselves better.
Great. A framework for a conversation, a difficult conversation with a player where you're trying to get to a change. The GROW model. G for goal. What's our goal in this situation? R for reality. What's our current reality of the relationship? O for options. Okay, what are our options for moving forward here? W for what or when. Okay, what are we going to do next, and when are we going to do it? Mark?
This fits into preventative as well, by the way. So ask whether all your players or your key captains, leaders, at the end of a training week, before the match, ask them to reflect the practice. How effective has the practice been? How good have we been? Has it set us up? Do not do it after the match. Doing it before the match will allow to get an honest, impartialized view more than results driven after the match. It may totally hinder, yeah, it was a great training week or not. This can help them reconnect to, actually we did well, or we didn't work hard enough, or we didn't work smart enough before the impact of the result. So again, that can really help reflection that could align interaction.
It's kind of a bit obvious now that I'm going to say it, but we haven't actually said it. Plan for these moments. You plan for your practices, you plan for your games because the game is coming, the practice is coming. Well, I can tell you what, if you've taken on the role of a head coach of a team this season, disconnect is coming as well. It's as sure as assured your games are coming and the schedule is. So plan for it. Come up with something that you think you can use. And because it's difficult to do this, guys, where it's very easy on a podcast to say, have these conversations, put these things in place, but plan for it and go for it and back yourself. And if it doesn't work out, there's value added. You've learned from that experience. So, for example, I just mentioned the NEAT model a moment ago, like designing that to use that when disconnect happens.
Great. I'm going to blatantly steal and repeat something you said earlier, Mark, because I wrote it in my notebook in red pen. The three Fs: be firm, fair, and friendly. If you're those three things in combination, like not majoring too much on one or the other, but if you're those three things in combination, then you can start to have great or much improved relationships. If you're firm without being fair, that's going to backfire. If you're friendly without being firm, players may start to use that relationship differently. So that's so simple. If I was working with a beginner coach or a parent who's starting to volunteer and coach, well, how do I sort of relate to the kids? Just do the three Fs.
I didn't make that up, by the way. That was from the Army Physical Training Corps military days many years ago.
Oh, of
So
course.
make sure you're setting measures that are realistic and fit for purpose of how you're going to measure, whether that's behaviors, etc., that you can benchmark against, and then make sure you honor them and consistently with them. Do not get caught up in making them up to suit your needs or your wants as a coach. So important. Involve everyone early on what they look like.
I would say coaching with authenticity. Be careful of your motivations as a coach when you take on the journey of coaching a team, and that they don't overshadow the needs and motivations of the players, because there's going to be a lack of alignment between the coach and the players, and that's going to create disconnect. And I think that's a whole podcast in itself about motivational displacement, and there to serve the needs and motivations of the players first, as opposed to your needs and motivations and what your desires are for yourself as a coach.
Well, that's a great way to finish, Alan.
Oh
And
no,
that's
I've got
made
one more. I've got one more. It's very
well, I
important.
was just going to say, has anyone got one more?
Yes, well, I have many more, but this is an important one that we haven't mentioned. Make sure very early on you share what effective communication is with everyone. So effective communication is only effective
Yeah.
if it has a desired impact, meaning don't spend just all the focus on how you communicate to people. Spend a lot of time making sure, are you listening with intentionality and attention and responding effectively to what you're hearing being given to you. It's both ends of the spectrum. That's why I developed that three A's. If someone's reaching out, actually internally acknowledge it, don't push it back. And that process of accepting it, acting on it, that connection. So spend energy in making sure not just how I'm saying something, put a name on it, is solution based, not problem based, massively. But how, if someone's speaking to me, am I open to receiving it, and how am I responding to it from words to action? So important, often missed.
Simon, can I add one more in 10 seconds? Like, as a coach, take a risk, back yourself. These are never as bad as you think they are. These conversations with players at any level, senior level, highest level, or junior level, they're all there to get better. Just back yourself and go for it and have the conversations. It's never as bad as you think it is before you've had the conversation.
Brilliant way to finish. Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Mark. To all our listeners, please subscribe on your podcast feed. It does make a big difference. Apparently, if you ask for the alerts, that also makes a huge difference as well, as we try to share this content with other coaches. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and add a comment. As always, get in touch with us if you want to see us pursue a particular topic. Just get in touch direct, or drop a comment in YouTube. And just to finish, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Alan. And thanks to our listeners.
Thank you.